Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving deep into absolute chaos. Mr. Min has just dropped a bombshell, leaking explosive evidence that's destroying Mrs. Huang's empire live on national news. While Quan has his first explosive fight with his mother, Tu Lac's health is hanging by a thread. And the most passionate, desperate kiss yet is coming. Will their love survive this complete collapse? If you're loving this drama, don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. The morning light filtering through the thin hospital blinds felt deceptively gentle, as if the world outside refused to acknowledge the chaos already unfolding. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit at Nidong 2 Hospital, the steady rhythm of monitors continued their soft symphony. But the peace that Quan and Tu Lac had clung to for the past few hours shattered the moment Quan's phone began to vibrate relentlessly on the bedside table. He reached for it, frowning. Notifications flooded the screen, dozens of them. News alerts, frantic messages from his assistant, calls from the company's legal department, and trending hashtags that made his blood run cold. With a sinking heart, he tapped the top headline. Explosive corruption scandal. Evidence implicates prominent businesswoman Mrs. Huang in multi-million-dollar fraud from 3 years ago. The article wasn't just a rumor. Attached were high-resolution scans of contracts, bank transfer records, voice recordings of hushed conversations, and witness statements carefully curated to paint an unmistakable picture. Mr. Min had not simply sent a private summons, he had declared war publicly. Within minutes, the story had exploded across every major Vietnamese news outlet, financial forums, and social media platforms. Hashtags like Huang corruption and empire falls were already trending nationwide. Tu Lac stirred beside him on the narrow hospital bed. Her face was still ghostly pale from the collapse the night before, her lips dry and colorless. She pushed herself up slowly, one hand instinctively reaching for his arm. Quan, what happened? Her voice was barely above a whisper, fragile from exhaustion. He didn't answer right away. His thumb scrolled faster, jaw clenching tighter with every new article that appeared. Photos of his mother from past galas were now paired with damning headlines. Their family's carefully built empire was being ripped apart in real time, live for the entire country to see. Before he could speak, the door opened. A uniformed court officer stood there, expression neutral as he handed over an official envelope, stamped with the seal of the Economic Investigation Department. Mrs. Huang, who had been sitting quietly beside the incubator, watching her grandson's tiny chest rise and fall, rose to her feet. The moment she read the document, all color drained from her face. Her hands trembled violently. "I am required to appear tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., she whispered, voice cracking. She looked at her son, eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. "This is my sin, Quan. I will go alone. I will confess everything. You stay here with Tu Lac and our grandson. Do not get involved in this mess. I won't let my mistakes destroy what you finally built." The words ignited something deep inside Quan. He stood up so abruptly that the plastic chair scraped loudly against the tiled floor. His voice, usually calm and controlled, thundered through the small room for the first time in his life. "Enough!" The single word echoed off the walls. Both Tu Lac and Mrs. Huang stared at him in shock. Quan had never raised his voice at his mother, not once. "You still want to play the martyr?" he continued, eyes blazing with a storm of rage, pain, and betrayal. "After everything, you destroyed Lanan's life for the sake of your precious image. You manipulated contracts, paid bribes, and nearly tore my family apart. All because you thought you knew better than everyone else. And now when the consequences finally arrive, you want to shoulder it alone again? Like I'm still a helpless child you need to protect?" Mrs. Huang's lips quivered. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Con, try. I'm doing this for you, for your future, For your wife and son. For me? Quan let out a bitter, broken laugh that sent a chill through the room. Your version of "for me" has only ever brought pain. I searched for Lan An for years, blaming myself every single day. I almost lost Tu Lac because of the secrets you buried. And now you want to walk into that investigation room alone so you can control the ending? No, I won't let you. His chest heaved. For the first time, the proud, composed man who had carried the weight of his family's legacy looked truly broken and furious at the same time. Tu Lac tried to stand, wanting to calm the storm between mother and son, but the moment her feet touched the floor, her knees buckled. A wave of dizziness crashed over her. She grabbed desperately at the edge of the bed, breathing hard. Lac! Quan was beside her in less than a second, his strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her gently but firmly back onto the bed. He held her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, as if she might disappear. Don't move, baby. Please, he whispered urgently, his anger toward his mother instantly shifting into raw fear for his wife. His lips pressed against her temple, then her forehead, over and over in a desperate attempt to soothe her. At that exact moment, the attending doctor entered for morning rounds. He took one look at Tu Lac's pale face and the way she leaned heavily against Quan, and his expression turned grave. After checking her blood pressure, pulse, and running a quick examination, he sighed. Mrs. Tu Lac, your body is at its absolute limit. The collapse last night was a serious warning sign. Postpartum recovery combined with severe exhaustion has put you at high risk for hemorrhage and cardiac complications. I'm ordering complete bed rest for at least the next 7 to 10 days. No standing for long periods, no stress. If you push yourself again, we could be looking at life-threatening consequences. Tu Lac bit her lip, trying to force strength into her voice. I can handle it, doctor. My son needs me. My husband needs me. The doctor shook his head. What your family needs right now is for you to stay alive and healthy. Rest, Mrs. Tu Lac. That is the only way you can help them. As soon as the doctor left, silence blanketed the room, broken only by the soft beeps of the monitors around their newborn son. Quan sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Tu Lac fully into his lap, careful not to jostle her. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing her in as if she were his only anchor in the storm. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured against her skin, voice low and fierce. I'm canceling everything. The company, the meetings, the projects, none of it matters. You and our son are my priority. He looked up at his assistant who had arrived moments earlier, standing nervously by the door. Cancel all my schedules for the next 2 weeks. Move whatever you can online. Postpone the rest, and get attorney Tran Van Kiem on the phone immediately. The best economic criminal lawyer in the country. Tell him money is no object. I want him here by this afternoon. Mrs. Huang watched her son, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. For the first time in many years, the formidable woman looked small and defeated. Quan, please don't throw everything away because of me, she whispered. He met her eyes, his gaze still hard but no longer shouting. We're not throwing anything away, Mom. We're finally facing the truth. Together. No more secrets. No more one-person sacrifices. If you try to take all the blame alone again, I will never forgive you. Mrs. Huang covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. After a long moment, she nodded slowly, accepting her son's decision for perhaps the first time. Quan turned his full attention back to Tu Lac. He cupped her pale face with both hands, thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had slipped down her cheeks. Look at me, lass, he said softly. I know you're scared. I know you want to be strong for all of us. But right now, being strong means letting me carry the weight. Let me protect you the way you've protected our son these past days. Tu Lac's lips trembled. She reached up and clutched his shirt, bearing her face against his chest. I don't want to be a burden. You could never be a burden. His voice cracked with emotion. You are my life, my home, my reason for fighting. He tilted her chin up and kissed her, slow, deep, and filled with every ounce of love and desperation he felt. It wasn't the fiery passion of the hallway last night, but something quieter, more profound, a promise sealed with lips and breath. He kissed her again and again, soft, lingering presses that spoke of forever, even as the world outside crumbled. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. An o jai voi em, he whispered in Vietnamese, the familiar words wrapping around her like a warm blanket. No matter how dark it gets outside these walls, I will not leave this hospital until our son can go home with us. We fight together, always. Outside, the scandal continued to explode. News vans had begun gathering near the hospital entrance. Mr. Min's carefully leaked evidence was spreading like wildfire. Reporters were already digging into the family's past, connecting dots to Lanan's disappearance 3 years ago. But inside the quiet hospital room, bathed in the soft beeps of their baby's monitors, Quan held his wife tightly. His mother sat nearby, broken but no longer alone. Their newborn son slept peacefully in the incubator, unaware of the storm raging around him. For the first time in days, Quan felt a strange sense of clarity. The empire might fall, the reputation might shatter, but his family, his real family, would not break. Not if he had anything to say about it. The tension in the hospital room lingered long after the argument settled. Mrs. Hong had stepped out to speak with the arriving lawyer, leaving Quan and Tu Lac alone with their sleeping son. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but the air felt heavier now, thick with unspoken fears and the weight of a collapsing empire. Quan hadn't moved from the narrow bed. Tu Lac remained curled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. His arms were locked around her as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Every few minutes, he pressed soft kisses to the top of her head, her temple, the shell of her ear, small, constant reminders that he was there. "You should rest," he murmured, voice low and rough from exhaustion and emotion. "The doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said," Tu Lac whispered back, her fingers tracing slow circles on his chest. "But how can I rest when everything is falling apart because of me?" Quan pulled back just enough to look at her. His dark eyes burned with intensity. "Because of you? Lac, none of this is because of you. This storm started long before you entered my life. If anything, you're the only reason I still have something worth fighting for." Tu Lac's eyes filled with tears. She tried to sit up straighter, but a sharp wave of dizziness hit her again. Her body trembled. Quan immediately tightened his hold, supporting her weight completely. "See?" he said gently but firmly. "You're not allowed to push yourself anymore. Not even a little." He carefully shifted them both so she was lying down fully, then stretched out beside her on the narrow bed, pulling her into his arms until her back was flush against his chest. One of his hands rested protectively over her lower abdomen, still soft from giving birth, while the other stroked her hair. For a long while, they simply breathed together. The outside world felt distant, the buzzing phones, the reporters gathering downstairs, the lawyer's serious voice drifting in from the hallway. Here in this small bubble, only the three of them existed, but Tu Lac's mind wouldn't quiet. "I keep thinking, what if your mother goes to prison?" she whispered. "What if the company collapses? What if our son grows up with all this shame hanging over him? I feel so useless lying here while you have to carry everything." Quan's body tensed behind her. He turned her slowly in his arms until they were face to face. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Listen to me, Tu Lac," he said, voice dropping into that deep, commanding tone that always made her heart stutter. "You are not useless. You carried our son through a flood. You fought through pain and fear to bring him into this world. You stood by me when I didn't deserve it. Right now, the strongest thing you can do is heal. Let me be strong for both of us." He leaned in and kissed her, soft at first, a tender press of lips meant to comfort. But the moment their mouths met, something deeper ignited. The fear, the exhaustion, the overwhelming love that had been building since her collapse in the hallway surged forward. The kiss deepened. Quan's hand slid into her hair, tilting her head as he claimed her mouth with growing hunger. Tu gasped softly, her fingers clutching his shirt. What started as comfort quickly turned desperate. He kissed her harder, tongue sweeping in to taste her, pouring every unsaid word into the connection. "I need you to understand," he growled against her lips between kisses, voice hoarse. "I would give up every company, every fortune, every reputation in the world if it meant keeping you and our son safe." Tu whimpered into his mouth, overwhelmed. Quan didn't stop. He kissed her like a man drowning, deep, devouring kisses that left her breathless. His hand moved down her back, pressing her body tighter against his, as if he could shield her from the entire outside world. After several heated minutes, he pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. Both of them were breathing hard. "Come with me," he whispered suddenly. Before she could protest, Quan stood and carefully lifted her into his arms, bridal style. She was too weak to argue. He carried her out of the room, nodding briefly to the nurse on duty who understood and looked away discreetly. He walked down the quiet hallway until he found a small, private staff lounge at the far end. Empty at this hour, the door clicked shut behind them. Soft afternoon light filtered through a single window, casting a warm glow over the simple couch and chairs. Quan sat down on the couch with Tu still in his lap, her legs straddling his thighs. His hands framed her face again. "I almost lost you last night," he said, voice cracking with raw emotion. "When I saw you falling in that hallway, something inside me broke. I can't go through that again." Then he kissed her with everything he had. This wasn't the gentle hospital room kiss. This was fire. Quan's mouth crashed against hers, deep, demanding, almost punishing in its intensity. His tongue invaded, stroking hers with desperate hunger. One hand gripped the back of her neck, the other pressed firmly on her lower back, pulling her down harder onto his lap. Tu moaned softly into the kiss, her body responding despite her exhaustion. She threaded her fingers through his hair, tugging him closer. He kissed her like he was afraid she might vanish, again and again. Hot, open-mouthed kisses that trailed from her lips to her jaw, down the sensitive skin of her neck, then back up to devour her mouth once more. His breathing grew ragged. "You are my everything," he rasped between kisses, nipping at her bottom lip. "My wife, the mother of my child, my reason for waking up every single day. Don't you dare think you're a burden. If you fall again, I fall with you. Understand?" Tu nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, even as she kissed him back with equal passion. Their mouths moved together in a heated rhythm, wet, urgent, filled with months of built-up emotion. Quan's hands roamed her body with reverence and possession, never crossing the line of her recovery, but making her feel utterly wanted, utterly loved. At one point he pulled back, eyes dark and blazing. He dropped to his knees right there on the floor in front of the couch, still between her legs. With trembling hands, he lifted the hem of her hospital gown just enough to press reverent kisses across her soft, recently pregnant belly. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, voice breaking. "Both of you. No matter what happens with the company, with my mother, with Min, I will build a new life for us, even if it's just a small house in the village. As long as I have you, I have everything." Tu cradled his head, sobbing quietly as she ran her fingers through his hair. Quan rose again, capturing her lips in another soul-searing kiss. This one was slower, deeper, more intimate. Their foreheads stayed pressed together as they shared the same breath. They stayed in that lounge for nearly an hour, kissing, whispering promises, holding each other through waves of emotion. Quan refused to let her feet touch the floor the entire time, carrying her back to their room only when she finally dozed off against his shoulder. Back in the NICU room, Mrs. Huang and the lawyer were waiting. The conversation that followed was long and heavy. Attorney Tran Van Kiem laid out the harsh reality. The evidence Mr. Min leaked was damaging, but not yet conclusive. There was still a chance to fight, to negotiate, perhaps even counterattack if they could prove coercion or hidden motives on Min's part. Quan listened carefully, one arm still wrapped around the sleeping Tu Lac. That evening, as golden sunlight painted the room in warm hues, their son showed signs of improvement. The doctor allowed Quan to hold him for the first time, tiny, warm, and fighting. Quan cradled the baby against his chest with one arm while keeping his other hand linked with Tu Lac's. For a brief, precious moment, the storm outside felt farther away, but peace was never meant to last. Just as night fell, Quan's phone rang again. This time it was his head of security. "Sir, there's a problem. Mr. Min has arrived at the hospital. He's demanding to speak with Mrs. Huang, and he's brought reporters with him." Quan's entire body went rigid. He gently passed the baby back to the nurse and stood up, eyes hardening into steel. "Stay with Lac," he told his mother. "Lock the door if you have to." Tu Lac reached for his hand, fear flashing in her tired eyes. "Quan." He leaned down and kissed her one last time, fierce, protective, full of unshakable promise. "I'll handle this. No one touches our family." As he walked out of the room toward the gathering storm downstairs, Quan's mind was clear. The empire might burn. His mother's past might finally catch up, but he had already made his choice. Tu Lac, their son, their future. Everything else was secondary, and he would fight like hell to protect it. In the midst of their newborn son's recovery, Quan and Tu Lac's fragile peace is shattered when Mr. Min publicly leaks explosive evidence of Mrs. Huang's past corruption. As the scandal explodes across the media, Mrs. Huang receives an urgent summons to appear before the Economic Investigation Department the next morning. Torn between family and duty, Quan has his first explosive argument with his mother, refusing to let her face the consequences alone. Meanwhile, Tu Lac's body reaches its limit after her recent collapse. The doctor warns that any more stress could endanger her life. Determined to protect his loved ones, Quan cancels all work, hires the country's top lawyer, and stays by Tu Lac's side. In a private moment of raw emotion, he pulls her into a deep, passionate kiss filled with fear, love, and unbreakable resolve. As Mr. Min dramatically arrives at the hospital with reporters, the family's greatest trial has only just begun.